Hello, everybody, and welcome to the NextGen Planners podcast. My name is Dan, and I'm the head of community experience here at NextGen Planners. And today, I am very, very excited to be joined all the way from the US on the East Coast, as we've just been talking about, by Mr. Bob Viers. How are you doing today, Bob?
I'm doing okay. Life is good.
Good stuff, man. Yeah, it's nice. It's fantastic to have you on. It's really, really good to get the chance to talk to you and the possibility to talk to you as well. So thank you so much for spending the time with us this afternoon here in the UK. I know it's 9 a.m. where you are. So again, thank you for joining us bright and early.
No, I'm glad to be here.
So for anyone who doesn't know Bob in the audience, firstly, where have you been? But he is an author and columnist and is the brains behind Insider Information, which is an information service for financial planners in the US. But there's so much more to it than that, which we'll explain throughout this podcast as well, of course. But to kick us off, Bob, can you just tell us a little bit about what it is that you get up to on a daily basis?
Well, being a writer in this world, you have an unlimited learning curve, as I think you know, and the problem is things change, which is annoying to people who are as old as I am. We want everything to stay the same, and we prefer to be, writing on cuneiform tablets and carving. But what I do is I talk to people on a daily basis and ask them what they're doing and how they're doing it, and trying to find things that work. And I call myself a futurist, and I'm trying to figure out where the profession is going. And the profession goes to things that work, marketing programs that work, better ways to serve clients, better ways to give advice to clients. And when I find something that works, I report on it. And what I've discovered is that the planning profession, I'm sure it's this way everywhere, is a big laboratory. Everybody's trying stuff, and some stuff works and some stuff doesn't. I don't report on things that don't work until they actually do. That's kind of a filter that I use. So I'm trying to figure out where is it going and what are the best ideas and practices going forward.
Really good. You said profession there so many times, and I would imagine that because we're going to talk about the difference that we've had in this place in the profession or industry for over the years. I mean, I'm assuming that when you joined this profession or industry or whatever it is that you want to call it, it wasn't referred to as a profession. It would probably be referred to as an industry back then, was it?
Mostly a sales culture is what I came into. I came into this in 1982, so that dates me a little bit. Yeah. And I was actually an experienced journalist at that time, so it dates me even more. But yeah, when I came into the business, I really loved the idea. I was named editor of something called Financial Planning Magazine, which still exists, before I had ever balanced my own checkbook. So I came in completely cold. I mean, I had no idea what this profession was like, and I was enchanted by the idea of giving financial advice and expertise. And then I discovered that pretty much all the readers of the magazine were salespeople, and worse than that, they were selling things that turned out not to be ideal investments, if that makes sense.
It does.
And so there was this gap, between what was being promised and what was actually happening out there. That gap is closed. Not completely. This is not really a profession yet, because there are criteria for a profession, and we haven't met them all yet. One is there needs to be government licensing, and there need to be barriers to entry that have to do with ethical issues and whatever. And some of those are fairly intractable. And then the big one, the one that's going to be the hardest for us to achieve, is there needs to be a college or university curriculum devoted entirely to this profession. And of course, the curriculums are scattered all over the place right now. There is no department of financial planning in a particular area yet, but we're moving toward these things. And so we're not really a profession yet, but I talk aspirationally about it. And I think a lot of advisors act professionally and are professionals in the way they interact with their clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the UK, there's a few universities that do. I think they offer financial planning as a degree for people. But it's one of the things we talk about on the podcast quite often is perhaps that's the reason why we are struggling to get people into financial planning here in the UK, is that it's not seen as a career choice for younger people, the same way that accountancy and law and those kind of things are. Financial planning doesn't have a degree or a university route, therefore that's the reason that it's perhaps not seen as a career for people as well.
Well, and here they're in all sorts of departments. They might be in the finance department, they might be in the home economics department, or what I think they call it family finance department now or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, until we get some consistency in the educational profession, I don't think, or educational world, I don't think we can call it a profession yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's right, exactly right what you said as well, that financial planners act professionally, but it's not quite a profession just yet. I think actually it's one of the I guess you could say industries or careers that people actually act the most professionally in, but it's still not called a profession just yet, which is weird, isn't it? So, okay, that's good. This next question is a huge one, Bob, and this is probably one of the ones that scared you when I sent these questions over. But from the people that you talk to and all the things that you pick up on a daily basis from all those people that you see doing great work and coming up with new things and things like that, what would you say is the biggest challenge that financial planners face in the profession? And I'm calling it a profession. What do you think is the biggest challenge that they face in the profession today? And then there's another part to the question, which I'll ask afterwards, which is how do we think we can overcome that challenge? But let's answer the first bit first. What do you think the biggest challenge is today?
All right. And I should say, when you sent your questions over, for a couple hours, I crouched in a fetal position under my bed, and so, but I'm recovered now. I'm okay now.
That's good. Yeah, I've got a habit of doing that to people as well. I should maybe stop doing that, shouldn't I?
There are several challenges that we're facing right now. And I'm going to talk about one of them that probably most people don't talk about, but the average financial planning firm is owned by somebody who looks like me. And that means white hair, and, they shake and tremble a little bit when they talk. And, they talk about retirement, but, they're 80 years old and feel like they still have 20 more years of good professional life ahead of them. Yeah. And they don't want anything to change until they retire. And so what's happened I remember when people that I grew up with were the dynamic agents of change. They were the rebels against the brokerage model. They were the rebels against the sales model. And now they're the obstacles to the many changes that I think we need to make. So the first thing I think we need to do is have the people who founded this profession, who started this profession, start to give up the reins, start to say, you've got, and particularly in technology, but also in client service, start to say, you're the successor. What kind of firm do you want to own when I finally give up and, die with my boots on or whatever? Let's start working toward that. Yeah. And that's not happening as rapidly as it should be. And so the evolution is stalled. So that's the first challenge. The first challenge is to pass the torch to people who are looking forward, not backward. And one of the things I tell younger advisors, probably the best advice I give younger advisors is, your superpower when you're young is your ability to see the difference between what is and what should be. And as you get older, as people get older, that distinction gets blurred. You get accustomed to what is, and you want to kind of hang on to what is, and what should be becomes, do I really want to change? And I ask people when I do my presentations, I have people raise their hand. How many of you would like to go back to where you were 10 years ago? And very, very few people raise their hand. And I say, so that means the change has been positive. We should be embracing it. And yet, we instinctively to happen until they start to get to kind of the middle of their careers. And so what I would like to see is more input from younger advisors moving forward. So that's one thing. Two other challenges that I think are really important. One is we have made a transition from commissions to fees here in the US. I mean, there are still people who are compensated by commission, but we all kind of look down on them. They may accept a few commissions, but everybody's either fees or mostly fees right now. What happened though is we transitioned to assets under management. And assets under management, I think, is fees and drag. Another of my lines when I give presentations is I say, how many professions, when you ask somebody, how much are you going to charge me? They say, I'm not sure. How much have you got? And I really don't think that's the right way to compensate a professional.
No.
So we're going to have to transition to something else. Is it a subscription model? Is it monthly or quarterly fees? Is it an hourly model? And I've done research. I've asked people, what's your model now and what are you transitioning? Just about everybody here on this side of the pond is trying out other fee models, particularly with younger clients. And eventually, I think those experiments are going to come to fruition and we're going to know what that fee structure is going to be. But the transition is not going to be easy. I think it's going to be a little harder to tell your clients, all right, now we're charging a different way. See this meter behind your desk, that's the new way we're going to charge. And particularly older clients, once again, they're not they don't change easily. The other is we're eventually going to have to get away from generic financial planning. Everybody is a general practitioner. And if you look at other professions, there's no other profession where everybody is a GP. You have specialists, and the specialists know more about a narrower group. And what I think is going to happen, and what's starting to happen, is they call it a niche, but it's not really a niche, it's a specialty. You specialize in certain kind of clients. And so that when they walk in the door, you know what their challenges are before they even open their mouth. You know how to solve their challenges. You know their idioms. You know their jokes. You have much deeper expertise, and the value of the services you provide, the value of your expertise applied to somebody who you specialize in is going to be much higher than the value of, I'm going to give you a retirement plan and I'm going to check your insurance coverages and we're going to meet and talk about your portfolio every quarter.
Yeah.
And about your kids. So everybody talks about, life planning and getting deeper into, and I think that's just necessary, but I don't think that's the answer to driving deeper value in the financial planning profession.
Yeah. That's really good. I asked for one challenge and I got 3. So we're getting 3 for the price of 1 today, which is good. Now, your last point, I completely agree with. I was speaking to someone yesterday called Laura Latourette. She is a brilliant financial planner who works in Northern Georgia in the US. And she specifically works with LGBT clients.
Mm-hmm.
And the what you just said there about she knows their idioms when they come in. She knows what they're going through. She understands their situation because she works with them all the time. And so when they come in, they don't almost have to explain their problems and their challenges to Laura because she pretty much already knows them before they've even said them anyways. And that kind of level of relationship is just, you don't get that when, like you said, you're a general practitioner. And one of the things I always say is in your marketing as well, if you're talking to everyone, you're in reality, you're resonating with no one because no one can see themselves as different to everyone else. So they always think you're talking to someone else rather than to them. Whereas when you've got a specialism or a niche is what you call it or a niche, what you call it in the US, you those people that you're talking to feel like you're talking directly to them. And so from a marketing perspective, it's brilliant as well. It's really good. I like them. Another big question for you here, Bob, I'm afraid. But you obviously spend a lot of time looking at financial planning firms and different financial planners and things like that. From your perspective and in your opinion, what do you think that a modern financial planning firm should look like today? And I've got a feeling it'll probably play on some of the things we've just been talking about there. But what do you think that a modern financial planning firm should look like in today's world?
Well, it's an interesting question because there are a number of models out there, and I've looked at a number of models, and I'm going to start with a negative. I don't think we have in the U.S. we have this consolidation, and somebody asked me a long time ago, "What do you think the future planning firm is going to look like? And is it going to be just 5 or 6 huge firms that dominate the landscape?" And And I actually I did a presentation on this where I looked at different professions, the accounting profession, the legal profession, and how they evolved in terms of size of firms. And what they did was they eventually arrived at 4 to 6 giant firms that were national firms that, you know, had thousands of professionals working for them. And then a number of regional firms that are strong in one area, one part of the country. And then there are a number of firms that kind of dominate a city, if that makes sense. And in every case, the majority, 70% or more, are working with a firm with 2 or 3 partners and are smaller firms, typically that have people who have left these larger firms because they didn't think they'd make partner, or they didn't like the idea of being told how to provide advice. And then those firms would grow up and they'd get bigger, and then they would consolidate, and then they would become one of the city firms, and then people would leave that. And so there's a constant churning and replenishment, if that makes sense, at the bottom. And I think that's where the financial planning profession is going to go. I mean, it's pretty obvious that that's where the dynamics will lead you. It won't lead you to any dominant one kind of firm. But I don't think the giant firms are the firms of the future. What I've seen with the large firms, they call them consolidators. They call them, they're growing inorganically, and inorganic growth is a big deal right now. And a lot of people look like me are selling their firms because they don't have a successor. How they manage to get to my age without having a successor is another question that you might ask and get an embarrassed answer to. But they're, you know, so these giant firms provide an exit for people who have built their firms and consolidate, and that's fine. That's a good thing. But those firms, you know, they specify, this is how we offer financial planning, and we, as you know, 600 or 700 advisors are all doing roughly the same thing, feeding into the same back office, giving the same advice. Not really, specialization is not really what they do. They're relying on their brand. And I think that's, we in the US, I just finished a white paper with somebody named Matthew Jackson, who is a really wise consultant in this business. And we talked about peak 1 and peak 2. Peak 1 in the old days was commissions. Peak 1 is an evolutionary term where, you know, there's like the monkeys lived in the trees, and that was a peak 1 environment, and they were comfortable there. And then a few of them jumped down into the savannah and they started adapting, and it was very uncomfortable for them at first until evolutionary adaptation took over and they became the dominant species on the savannah, and eventually started building cities and creating professions like ours. The peak 1, generally it's a comfortable environment, but it has to be left at some point because it gets crowded and outmoded. The peak 1 in the past was commissions. The peak 1 now is assets under management, a large firm, and generic financial planning, and those all describe those large firms. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm seeing in the future is smaller firms that specialize in a particular kind of client, and their structure is different. The structure is, you have the planning professionals, maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 5, but not much more than that, who are the decision makers of the firm. They're the visionaries, if you will. And you have a back office professional who runs the back office and actually runs the firm, who's the COO. And that's the doer. That's somebody who makes these things happen. You have the vision and they do it. And you want the planners to be the visionaries, because you don't want a bean counter in the back office deciding how to cut back on services in order to be more profitable. You want advocates of client service to be making decisions about the firm. But you don't want those people to be running the firm, because their highest and best use is working with clients. So it's kind of like a restaurant. You've got the front office and the back office, the front of the build, the front of the store and the back of the store, if you will. The people who are providing the service need to be the to be focused on that. That's their province. And the people who see the big picture of how the whole firm runs need to be the COOs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And then the other part of it is that this firm needs to be a technology firm. They need to be technologically savvy. They need to be adopting the newest and best solutions for their clients. And once again, these giant firms are falling behind in this area, whereas the smaller firms, we do a survey every year of all the technology that's available to US planners. And there are a lot of them, like 500 different programs is what we rate them all and use user ratings and market share ratings. And every year there are a few of those that emerge from nowhere in a new category that make the help you leverage your service and make your service more valuable to clients. Yeah. And the early adopters of those tend to be the best advisory firms. So, I see peak 2 as specialization, bifurcation of the management of the firm, and being aggressively a technology forward firm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. It's a lovely way to explain it. It really is. It's very, very, I think I could get your analogies very strongly. And it's really positive and optimistic way to think about it as well, which is good. And if for those businesses who are looking to grow, from all the people that you've seen and things like that, if you could recommend one thing to those small financial planning businesses to really, really push on and accelerate their growth of their business, what would you say is the best thing or what would your best piece of advice be to those guys?
I've been talking to the firms that offer social media marketing to advisors and the advisors who are power users of those. And what I found, we did the survey, and I found that roughly 25% of American advisory firms are power users of those social media marketing. They subscribe to all of them. And the other 75%, as near as I can tell, every once in a while will tweet something, which is probably not. What I think the biggest difference today, as opposed to 10 years ago, is that we're meeting with clients remotely. So you can have clients everywhere now. You and I can work together as advisor and client without any problem. We get a little time difference, but that's not such a terrible problem. We're talking now. And so, we could work with somebody on the moon. We could work with somebody in China. So you don't need to be confined to your own local area anymore. And most advisors don't get that. Most advisory firms, when I say they tweet every once in a while, they rely on somebody playing golf with people at the local country club, and that's how they get clients. That's not going to work in the future. So if you want to accelerate your growth, once you have decided who you're going to specialize in, you start creating articles, podcasts. You start being generous about educating that community. You want that community to see you as a resource even before they start working with you, well before they start working with you. And the most interesting experiments that I'm seeing now are people who are creating communities actively where they say, all right, my specialization is, and there's one, Wall Street women. And women on Wall Street, they're in constant danger of being harassed. They're overlooked for this person does is she says, all right, well, who would you want to hear in a presentation? And the people, her clients, tell her, and then she has that person speak on a video call and invites the community of Wall Street women, and her clients invite all their friends and neighbors, other women who are in Wall Street, to attend that podcast of that person that they really like to see. And they do this maybe 3 times a year, maybe 5 times a year. They have gatherings together. I know there's a firm in Atlanta that puts on conferences for people that they specialize in. And of course, they send out a lot of messages and even poll that community to find out, what are your challenges? And that accomplishes two things. One thing, it's a great marketing tool. It's a really good way for, if you're a member of that community, you start considering that firm or that person as your advisor, because that's where you're getting your information about financial stuff. But it also allows for feedback from those people. You get to know those people better. You get to know their challenges better. It's a really great educational process about clients. So what I think the thing to do is to know a group of people and then be generous about educating them and be generous about creating events for them that draw them into the community. And the people who've done this, and it's not very many right now, are just absolutely thriving. They're not sure how to deal with all the people that are knocking on their doors.
Yeah, completely agree. I was talking to someone yesterday from the US who is in, I think he works in Texas, and he said to me, I can't remember what the exact figure was, but I think that he said the majority of his clients come from social media, and if social media wasn't even a thing 20 years ago.
Right.
And if you think about that, how much is that change? And the reason he's thriving so much, the reason he's oversubscribed, he can't take on any more people, basically, because he's just so busy from social media. And that is, but like you said there, he's thriving because he's spotted that gap. No one else is doing it, but he's also adding loads of value to his clients as well.
Well, before Zoom calls, before you could work with anybody in the country, marketing through social media didn't make a lot of sense, because how many people who you see on Facebook happen to live within 30 miles of your office? Yeah. But now you can create a national practice and market to everybody, and social media reaches everybody.
You absolutely can. I think, you guys in the US, it feels quite kind of like self-deprecating to say this for UK, the UK, but you guys in the US are actually, usually quite a little bit ahead of us than in the UK here. And I'm seeing
we have a bigger laboratory.
Exactly. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the reasons behind it. And I'm definitely seeing this kind of stuff that you're talking about, certainly in the US, not so much in the UK just yet. Maybe I'm just not seeing it. I don't know. But it's certainly bigger in the US, these kind of people who are taking real advantage of that at the moment.
And you understand, we're only talking about 20 or 30 people in the US. So,
yeah, I mean,
this is not everybody in our profession.
No, absolutely not. I think, maybe, I think it probably is around that figure. Yeah. So, yeah. And it's kind of on that note, but, I don't know what it's like in the US in terms of, I haven't actually looked at the figures, but certainly in the UK, we're not, potentially, we're really not doing very well at getting young people into the profession. There's the barriers to entry is a little bit high at the moment, and it's also not seen as a profession or as a career choice for many people at school. We were talking about this before. Mm-hmm. Do you have any perspectives, or what would you be your opinion on how we actually build it to make sure that young people do come into it? How do you think we can get more people to come into financial planning?
I talk to university people about this regularly, and we do our own conference, and we invite people from the people who are running university programs and their students to come in. And one of the best things that I've seen is having a financial planner come into the finance department or the psychology department. And the latter is really interesting to me, and speaking about what they do as a profession. And it's always very different from what people imagine. People think this is primarily a sales and numbers profession. And 90% of it is client service and client communication. And so anyway, the conversation generally turns to, this is the most rewarding profession anybody can do, because you can help people make dramatic, positive life changes, and you can talk to them about the possibilities of their life. You can talk to them about, things. I talk to a lot of advisors who say that sometimes when they talk about goals and objectives, their clients start crying because they've given up on really important goals that they now think that maybe could be achievable with, the the financial Sherpa, helping them get through all the complexities that they had given up on. So it's tremendously rewarding, and it's also quite remunerative. Easy for me to say. You can make money at this business. It's not. And if you start your own business, there are a lot of people that need this kind of help, and it's not hard to start this kind of business. You don't have to set up a manufacturing facility and, whatever. You just need to know how to talk to people. And so when you talk to people in the finance department, and just tell them what you do, they're looking at either analyzing accounting statements, or they're talking about, trading futures all day long, looking at 5 different monitors on the screen. And, and then you say, well, trying an alternative career is you can sit down in front of people and change their lives, and they will be eternally grateful, and they will pay you whatever you ask for, because, if you give them the opportunity to have the life of their dreams, or the life that they want to live, then money is not really any object.
Yeah.
And the accounting department, the finance department, that's a fairly easy sell. The psychology department, a lot of those people, they're not looking at a remunerative, I'm having trouble with that word, profession as psychologists, but those same skills are easily applied to financial planning. And then there are career changers. There are a lot of teachers out there who, education is a big part of financial planning, communication, being able to. So I think there are 2 vectors, and I should close with that. One vector is people in college already who are in a degree, who've never considered financial planning, and who will see a better future for themselves. And the other vector is career changers who, the trust company people, the go-to person at an HR department, who is the person who explains the benefits to people. That's a kind of a dreary job, but it's fundamentally financial planning. Teachers, and particularly women. Here in the U.S., we have a problem with recruiting women because of the number one, the perceptions, and number 2, the fact that women have been overlooked in promotion for years in the wirehouse business, and that's one of the training areas to bring people into what I call real financial planning. And that's been closed to women because they tell women, now you'd never survive, you can't sell, and so they don't get into the profession that way through. I think women are the future of financial planning, frankly, because I think a lot of the skills that you need tend to be more easily acquired and more natural to women than to men. Men, your conversation turns to your favorite athletic team and the money, whereas women, how are your kids doing? What are your plans for the future? How are you? So but it's a challenge. I think people are going to have to get out and work at it. Does that make sense? Any of that?
It does. Yeah, I think I certainly agree with your last point on women as well. I think I've heard a lot of people say that, and there's a conversation about the role of women in financial planning and how good they are, and I know some fantastic. Pretty much all of the people in all of the female financial planners in our community are absolutely amazing people, and they do brilliant work. And yeah, I completely agree with you on that point. This is kind of related. For those people who are just literally coming into financial planning now, I know that you had been an experienced journalist when you first got into financial planning, but if you could go back and give yourself, your younger self, a piece of advice about your career in financial planning, what would you say to your younger self?
Well, the interesting thing is, I gave myself really good advice when I started. I decided that every interview that I would do, I would say, look, you're talking to a dumb journalist, use words I can understand, explain things to me, because chances are, if you start using acronyms, you're gonna lose me. and we'll start from the beginning. And then at the end of every interview, I would say, is there anything that I was not smart enough to ask you that you would have liked to have told me, or anything that's relevant? And what that degree of humility allowed me to do was put people at ease about telling me things. This is, and I have a pretty high profile here in the US. People are sometimes intimidated to talk to me until I do that. And so that level of humility, and you have to come at this business with a level of humility. There is so much to know and so much to learn and so many new developments that anybody who thinks they've got it, they've mastered it, now I can stop evolving, you stop evolving and you start a process of fossilization. And I've managed to avoid fossilization all these years. I think what I would tell myself in the future is that if I could go back, I wasn't sure that there was a need for someone to be the pollinator, if you will, someone who would go from flower to flower and try and figure out, and I would be a little less shy about giving back in my interviews. Now, when I do an interview, I sometimes they'll ask me, well, what do you think about this and this that I'm doing? And I'll be kind of an unpaid consultant for the person I'm interviewing about some specific issue, and it's a trade. It's they're getting something out of it, I'm getting something out of it, and then because there's not a lot of value in the publicity in the profession. You're not going to get any new clients from other financial planners reading about you. Yeah. So, and maybe I'd be a little bolder about asking for interviews. At first I was a little shy about it because people are busy. And then I realized people love to talk about this stuff. They go home to their spouse and their spouse says, oh, let's not talk about financial planning again. And, but with me, I love this stuff. And so the conversation tends to be, for them, more satisfying.
It's a beautiful way to describe yourself as a pollinator. That's a lovely way to describe yourself. That's really, really nice. I feel like that can be quite analogous to those people who are early on in their careers of financial planning, especially the humility point is that if you break down those barriers, as soon as you're getting to know someone, you get to know them on a much deeper level. Like if you come at it from a completely transparent and almost vulnerable point of view, you say, I might be able to help you, but I certainly don't have all the answers. Immediately that puts you in that kind of on the same level as your client. And what a lovely way to start a relationship that is, rather than seeing it as a kind of, expert versus dum-dum environment, which people just don't like very much as well. So,
well, most advisors who I grew up with, they tend to dress like walking banks. And I actually interviewed, I did some consulting for a firm, and I said to clients, I said, what was your first impression of, I'm trying to think of his name now. And they said, well, he talked about stuff that I didn't understand at all. And he really impressed me. And I said, how did he impress you? And he said, well, he was so impressive that I felt like here is a person who will laugh when he sees what I've done with my own finances. And he really impressed me as here is someone who could take all my money and I would never know it. And those are the kind of impressives that you really don't want to give. You want to be less impressive, if you will. We're talking. And the best marketing advice I ever heard was to sit down with people and try and figure out how you can help them and be open to the possibility that you can't.
Yeah.
Be open to the possibility that you don't need their help. And tell them that, it's possible that, we won't be able to work together because, you're already doing everything right and in a way that I would recommend. And there's not a lot of reason for me to charge you for doing the things that I have already, or for already doing the things I would recommend. But maybe there's some way I can help you. Talk to me. Tell me what your situation is. And looking for ways to help really does turn marketing around. It instead of you trying to sell them something, you're trying to help them. They're going to get something out of it, or if not, it won't be a sale.
Yeah, it's like a value led kind of conversation, isn't it? Where it's so refreshing. It is very, very refreshing because we're used to so much sales nowadays as well, aren't we? So, um, let's move on to you a little bit, Bob, if you don't mind. So of course
I
you.
kind of do mind about that. That's irrelevant, I think. To
So I guess we're trying to take your career and your stories and the things you've done and how people in the audience can actually do that for themselves as well. So you of course are an author, and how many books is it now? Is it two? Was it one books that you've
well,
written?
I've written one in the profession and four novels.
Okay.
So my book in the profession is called The New Profession.
Yeah. And so can you take us through a little bit about the process of writing your book? Like how did you find that? And I know that there's a lot of people in our audience who are perhaps thinking about writing a book as a marketing tool and just to get some ideas out there. What advice would you give them on that process of writing a book as well?
When I'm coaching people in writing, what I tell them is don't type stuff up, dictate it, because talking is a natural activity for most people, and dictate whatever you want to say in any order, in any form. Just make sure you get it down. Say, oh, here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this, and by the way, I want to add this to it, and maybe this other thing should go in front of that, and just put it all down in your word processor or have somebody type it up. And editing is much easier than writing. What you don't want to do is get yourself worried about which thing you want to say first or second. You just want to get it down. And then once you get it all down, then you can start putting things together. You can start putting, this goes with this and that goes with that. And that's the organizational part of it. And sometimes you can hire somebody to do the organizational part or do the editing part. And then you do the final edit to make sure that it's you and it's personalized. And doing that, you and you can see how much material you have. A lot of people, they do this and then they discover they've only got about 30 pages of material. And so what they've got is a series of podcasts, not a book. But that's information you want to have, right? You want to know, do I have a book or not? And that process gets you there. And it also becomes a way of getting down the things that you want to communicate in your podcast. The pieces of the book that you're writing or the pieces of can be broken down into bite-sized pieces that are sent out through social media and what have you. So it's a good exercise to do. I just don't think you should type it.
Okay. And when we think about publishing, self-publishing, that kind of stuff, maybe a word on that. There's a lot of ways to do it nowadays. What would you say is the best way?
Well, I've self-published everything. And there are two reasons for it. Number one, the delay of a publishing company, they want to, bring it out next year at such and such fair or something. And meanwhile, they got to go through, a whole bunch of hoops and jumps and what have you. And they've got a printing schedule and all that crap. You avoid that. You get a more immediate gratification. And the other is there are so many gatekeepers that, it takes a long time just to get their attention. And I just don't see what they bring to the table. A big publishing company, what's it going to do? Is it going to do your marketing for you? Well, do they know your audience better than you do? Are they going, whatever money they're going to spend, that's going to come out of your pocket anyway. You might as well just do it yourself. Yeah. So I'm not really a big fan of the publishing companies. I just don't think that's, and the publishing companies I've talked to, and I've talked to all of them because they all call me and say, when are you going to write a book for us? And I say, well, what's in it for me? And they said, well, you'll get reputation. There's no money in it, of course, because they don't want to part with any of the profits. And so I just don't see it myself. I
okay.
Self-publish.
That's useful to know. That's good. Thank you. So one of the things that you're also known for is, and I think people would definitely agree with this in the audience, is for just saying it how it is. And you've done it at certain times on this podcast today. And I love that. I mean, as someone from the north of England, that is like perfect for me. But what advice do you have for the people in the audience on doing that and, breaking that mold and becoming a thought leader in terms of in financial planning? What would you say? What would you say to them?
Well, one of the things I've discovered over the years is that we humans are herd animals. I think you if you watch a pack of dogs, if you watch a herd of deer, they all tend to do the same thing at the same time. and they all look to each other to see whether everybody else is doing the same thing. And if they're not, they're uncomfortable. Anybody who's followed the markets know that, you startle a herd and you get a bear market. It just, that because everybody in the herd is behaving one way, and then next thing you know, they're running in the other direction. And so the best advice I can give, and the best advice I would give myself, is notice what the herd is doing. Notice what everybody thinks and question it. Does it make sense? And when you're younger, it's a lot easier than when you're older. I struggle with it now because, I look at what is and I think, yeah, of course, that's the way it is, and then I have to think, yeah, but why is it? And that becomes a more complicated question. Should it be? So what I would say is, break from the herd, question whatever the accepted mold is, because the accepted wisdom, the conventional wisdom changes. And your response to the conventional wisdom should change. That's the only way you're going to get ahead of the curve, is to understand. And if you have trouble doing that, and most of us do, then look to people who have questioned the status quo and take their advice with a grain of salt. Say, all right, this person is constantly, going against the grain. What of what they're saying rings true to me? Mm-hmm. Get outside opinions that don't agree with what the herd is saying. And that's also true in investing. When everybody is saying, oh my God, this bear market, it's never going to end. Well, that's probably not the best way to invest. And when you talk to your clients, they're part of the herd. They're scared to death. The markets are going to go down. They're going to keep going down until my investment portfolio is worth zero. And you tell them, the contrary. When the markets are going up, you caution them. You say, we're going to get a bear market sooner or later. Just be ready, and we're preparing for it. And when the markets are going down, say, the markets have never gone down to zero before, and there's going to be a bull market from this, and we don't want to miss that, and we don't want to lock in your losses. So you always kind of want to be a contrarian, at least in your communications and perhaps even in your thinking.
Yeah, I like that. It's almost like keeping the equilibrium at certain times. It's like when things go up and things go down, you stay in the middle, and you just mentioned there. I think financial education is a big part of that as well. The people who educated their clients before the pandemic and before this bear market, and now not having worried clients come to them and say, why have my investments gone down? Because they've already told them that it's going to happen at some point in the future. So it's almost saving yourself a job in the future as well, which is
there's a friend of mine, Harold Devansky, who is one of the thinkers here in the US, and he says that the most difficult conversation you can have is when you assure your clients that you're on top of everything and you know what's going to happen, and the markets are, just stay invested. The markets are always going to go up. And then when the markets go down, that's a difficult conversation, because the clients come to you and say, didn't you promise that you would keep me afloat? What he recommends is have those smaller, difficult conversations along the way. Where your portfolio is diversified. This particular asset class went down this quarter. Here's why we still own it. Yeah. The markets have gone up, but I don't think they're going to go up forever, and be aware of that. That introduces some difficulty into every conversation, but it precludes that one huge difficult conversation that you might end up having if you overpromise and underdeliver.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Great stuff. Well, we're coming up to an hour now, Bob, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So but we'll probably finish it there. But we do always like to ask our guests for a book or a piece of content that has helped them in their career so far. So what would you recommend our audience consume?
I am a big consumer of spiritual books that help you center yourself. It's not really spiritual in nature, but it is. I sound religious when I say this, but I think we all need to be aware of the fact that we are somehow connected to everything else in this world, and that we need to have a certain amount of compassion for others. We need to have a certain amount of understanding. We need to have a certain amount of self-awareness. And so the books that I tend to read are not, here's how to create a defined benefit plan, if you will, or here's how. So I'm going to recommend a couple of books. One is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Another is The Untethered Soul, and I have forgotten who wrote that, but it's a fantastic book about just how to be alive. And I think it's important for all of us to spend a little bit of time figuring out how to be alive. I meditate. I feel like that has helped me tremendously in my emotional wisdom, if you will, in my emotional centeredness, if you will. I'm not nearly as much of a fool as I would be naturally as a result of, a lifetime of, and I'm still a fool, but I think I've managed to, avoid some of the worst of it, if that makes sense. And somebody who's more naturally wise than I am, I think they could take that and run with it and become, truly, there's a hierarchy here of now of information. There's data, and then there's information, which sits above that, which is basically what the data means. There's knowledge, which is knowing and putting together different pieces of information in a way that helps you make sense. And then what sits above that is wisdom, having some idea of what all this means and how to apply it. And so the books I read tend to be more trying desperately for me to achieve wisdom. And I'm thinking by the time I hit the age of 100, I'll have gotten there. We'll see.
Brilliant. That book, by the way, is The Untethered Soul by, I think it's Michael Allen Singer. Is that the one you're thinking of?
That sounds right. Yes. Thank you.
That's the one. It's available on all platforms out there right now. And of course, your book, I'm assuming, is as well, Bob. Do you want to give us a quick plug for that?
Way better than all those other books. Yeah.
And where can people get that if they want to read that?
You can get an e-version of it at bobveris.com.
Cool.
So if you go to bobveris.com, then there's one of the options is to buy my book. Fantastic. And I'm thinking maybe I need to write a new one now because things are changing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's still relevant, but it's becoming less relevant in a dangerous way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, we can look forward to that. That's going to be brilliant. Well, yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Bob. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today, and thank you so much for giving up the time out of your busy schedule. We like to give the last word to our guests to come as a thank you for coming on to the show. So can you tell our audience where to find you, how to connect with you if they want to, and if you feel like it, you can also leave us with a bit of motivational, inspirational wisdom at the end as well.
Okay, well, that's a big job, but thank you for that. Well, I would invite anybody to connect with me if you've got ideas, thoughts, questions, because that's what I live for. Bob at bobveris.com, B-O-B at B-O-B-V-E-R-E-S.com. I don't need a business card because you can find me at bobveris.com. People can remember that. And as far as inspiration is concerned, I'm not sure that there is another relationship that people can have that's as important as their relationship with a financial planner if you do it right. Yeah. And so what I would tell everybody is, this is a business where you can transform people's lives in positive ways procedurally. And how many people can say that? How many people go about making people's lives better in procedural ways as a matter of business routine? It just doesn't happen. And so what I would tell people is, understand your value, recognize your value, and charge appropriately for your value. Because your advice will make the difference between somebody who, and I've seen this many times, somebody who's living from paycheck to paycheck when they retire, and somebody who retires and is thinking about what charitable organizations they'd like to support now. That's a huge difference over 20 or 30 years, but you can see how good advice, financial planning advice, can bridge that gap. And that's a wonderful gap. And not only that, but helping people realize that they can be doing more with their lives and enjoying their lives more, and encouraging them to, helping them get away from just their nose to the grindstone, which is where people just naturally tend to go to. That's the life planning aspect of it. Let's have some fun in your life. And I would encourage advisors to encourage that part of people that gets suppressed by every other force in our society. Did that meet your criteria or not?
It did, absolutely did. Better than our criteria. That is unbelievable. Thank you so much. So that was, thank you so much, Bob. That was Bob Viras on the Next Gen Planners podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, you can share it on all social media platforms. So LinkedIn is our biggest one, but we're also on Instagram and Twitter. And you can also find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and our website, which is nextgenplanners.co.uk. And on there, you'll find more information about our community, our amazing community now, which is nearly 800 strong, full of amazing people in financial planning. The Advice Stack program, which we have launched last year. And we've also got the training contract and, of course, our conferences. We've just come off the back of the biggest one that we've done so far, and we'll be planning another huge one for 2023, and that'll be really good fun as well. And of course, if you get a chance, please do leave us a review on the podcast. It really does help us, and you have no idea how much that can help us. But again, thank you so much to Bob for coming on today's show. Thank you guys for listening as always, and we'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.
Take care.